Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 22 of What If Naruto was in the Bleach universe. If you guys enjoy this What If, and want to see part 23 of it, comment down below, and let me know. Also check out previous parts of this What If. I have created a playlist for this What If, where you can find all the previous parts, link is in the description. And also go ahead, and check out other What Ifs in the channel. Before we start, please do support for more awesome content, it really means a lot. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and also share this video with your friends. So let's start this video. Like clockwork, after school ended, everyone filtered their way out of the building, and over to the mother base hideout, to get to work on their respective things of interest. Ichigo and Chad were steadily on lookout duty with the mod souls for bound attack, as was Hidan. Dara went over to Urahara's shop to go grab Yoruichi, and see what she had done with the Shinigami, watching their progress during the day. Meanwhile, Tatsuki stood in front of Naruto in the training ground of Mother Base with an uneasy look on her face. The reasoning being that upstairs Orihime was busy trying to figure her powers to fix Uryu. Maybe I should be up there with her, Tatsuki said demurely, a sharp contrast from her usual attitude and outlook. Oh no you don't, Naruto said, tapping his foot impatiently on the ground, still wearing his school uniform, having not even bothered to change. Since you seem to be burning through everything I'm teaching you so far, let's see exactly where your ceiling is, so I know what to focus on for later. Rinnegan. Naruto's eyes turned to the strange ripple pattern before he barked out another order, now channel chakra. Tatsuki's hands slammed together in the ram seal as she built up her chakra as instructed. There, is this good? She asked as Naruto stared at her intently. Remaining silent as he continued to look at her, Naruto's face scrunched up in thought. There's an easier way to figure this out, but the trees that I'd need to make paper from for the easy way don't exist, and I'm no gardener. What are you trying to do? Tatsuki asked, wondering just how long she'd have to flex her chakra coils for Naruto to find whatever he was looking for. Maybe if you tell me I can help. You can't because there's no way you'd know. Naruto commented glibly and without blinking, unless you know off the top of your head what your chakra nature is. Tatsuki tilted her head curiously. Chakra what now? Naruto didn't immediately answer, instead keeping silent for a few more seconds before smiling contently. Ah, there, that makes sense. You fire-natured. Of course you are. He then frowned. Of course you'd be natured at the kind of jutsu that I'm the worst at though. He seemed to be dealing with fire a lot lately. All of this rapid fire information was beginning to make Tatsuki's head hurt. I'm confused. What's going on? Gesturing for her to sit down with him by the lake in the grass, Naruto began to explain as best he could. He hadn't had to do such a thing in a very, very long time. You've seen me use electricity and wind and all kinds of stuff in my fights, right? Tatsuki nodded. Of course she had. Well, it's an advanced form of manipulating your chakra. And your chakra nature just shows me what you'll have the easiest time with, which will be fire. I can make fire. Tatsuki chirped questioningly, excited at the mere prospect of doing so. Being a ninja in Naruto's time had to have been the coolest job that ever existed. You will be, but you can't do it automatically now. You need your hand seals, and you need to get used to the feeling of the fire ninjutsu, before I can show you other things you can do with it. Naruto explained, drawing the kanji for each basic chakra element in the soil. Fire style. Fire release. Wind style. Wind release, lightning style. Lightning release, earth style. Earth release, and water style. Water release are the 5 basics. In theory you can learn a ninjutsu for all of them, but you'll only have an affinity for 1 or 2 by the time you're 30. He wasn't sure about that. She might get them sooner. She was currently blowing all of his previous expectations about her development right out of the water with gusto. Tatsuki raised her hand like she was in school. But what about when you push and pull stuff around without even touching anything? What element is that? It's not one, it's something that comes with having the Rinnegan. Naruto explained with a shrug. Swift release isn't a real element either. That one is actually what I got out of messing around with the Rinnegan powers and lightning release in my body. It takes more chakra than a normal person can keep going to work. But I'm not normal. Duh. Tatsuki said, but with no real intent in her voice. So how do I learn how to do this stuff? The grin came across Naruto's face as he stood up and got Tatsuki to do the same. For once I'm not going to give you a long list of mechanics and stuff to do before learning something, mostly because this has hand seals, so you just need to know the basic process on how to do something. Your first fire ninjutsu. He noted that the girl must have really loved fighting because she was bouncing from foot to foot on her toes with a smile that she just couldn't keep off of her face, and you will be learning how to breathe fire. That's how most fire ninjutsu work. You have to pull your chakra in your stomach and exhale correctly. What is it? Come on, I'm so ready. Her exhaustion from the previous night and her sluggishness from that morning was all but forgotten. She just wanted more training. What are the hand seals? Both of them slowly lifted their hands up, so that Naruto could show her the seals she would need to execute the jutsu: snake, ram, monkey, boar, horse, and tiger. He let her go through the seals time and time again, until she looked back up to him to show that she had it memorized for the moment. Now I hate doing fire ninjutsu, but it's supposed to look like this. He made the hand seals easily visible for her benefit, and inhaled deeply as he turned out towards the lake, fire style. Great fireball jutsu. Tatsuki watched with bright eyes as a massive orb of scorching flames 5 times a human's size rocketed from Naruto's mouth and flew out over the lake for dozens of yards before dissipating into the air. I put too much chakra in that. I said my control with fire techniques was shoddy. Naruto commented while scratching his head. Yours won't be that big. If it is, then it's because you overloaded it, and you'll feel like you just got through with a full spar against Yoruichi-chan. But anyway, this is simple. There's no need to shape anything or really keep control over it. It's a big breath of air and you're pushing out fire. Deciding to take it step by step, Tatsuki started slowly making hand signs, so she would remember them when it came time to actually execute the jutsu. Pull the chakra in my stomach, she said to herself, trying to get accustomed to the feeling of building chakra inside of her body. Is this dangerous? Kind of, Naruto admitted to her. She was breathing fire. Of course it was dangerous. That's why I put you by the lake. So, if you catch yourself on fire, you can jump right in until someone can heal you up. Now that you know what building the chakra feels like, go ahead and give it a try. You had to love the concern that the sensei showed his student. At least he wasn't throwing her down a crevice yet, because there was plenty of time for that later. Now was the time to teach his tomboy how to shoot fireballs. Well, no guts, no glory. Once more, Tatsuki went through the hand seals at half speed, building chakra inside of her body before taking a deep breath. Fire style. Great fireball, coughed Tatsuki, choked while expelling the fireball, releasing a small burst of fire that barely reached out 3 feet. Tatsuki fell backwards onto the ground, coughing black soot from her mouth. I wasn't ready for that. It felt like my lungs and throat were on fire. Naruto dropped down to one knee and rubbed Tatsuki's back soothingly as she got all of her coughing out. Yeah, it isn't going to be very fun this time. It won't be boring though. I hate you. Now you know you don't mean that. When you stop coughing, let's try again. With Gar. Early evening. Karakura Community Park. After getting out of school, Gar headed up to Rihara's shop to check with the man on his progress with Nell's injury to her mask, and to locate Yoruichi and figure out what she had been doing all day. If Orihime could heal Ryu's injury, then she could probably fix Nell's as well, even if it was a very old wound. He would just have to wait and find out later if she had managed to pull it off before bringing it up. Currently on his way back from the shop, Gar walked serenely in the sunset. The rare person that passed him by seemed to stare at the large gourd that sat on his back, but not enough that it was extremely out there. If it was brought up, he could just say it was an eccentric backpack. The fact that Ryu had been attacked the previous night put him on his guard, as the streets were next to empty with a person coming into his vision every so often, but his concerns weren't centered on himself. One would have to work very hard if they wished to kill Gar even on his worst day. No, Gar's thoughts were stuck on his friend and the man that was technically his boss, Uzumaki Naruto. He tried to hide it well, but even after all those years, Gar could notice the nuances in his friend's behavior. Seeing the Yoshino woman shook him up, and it was understandable. When he saw Hidan, even when he came across Gar, Naruto had been given good foundational reasons as to why they existed, so even when he had been surprised, when he had come across Gar in Wako Mundo, he more or less accepted it rather quickly. Now Yoshino hadn't come from nearly as far as Naruto's past, but her spirit hadn't been bound to Holy Land for eternity, nor had she been a hollow in hibernation. She had been as far as Naruto knew normal. He now knew that wasn't the case, but such a blast from the past was a spine shaker. The whole bound thing was screwy. If all they were after was the souls of humans, then why were they being caught now when not a peep had been heard from them before? Was there an endgame? Were they really foolish enough to roost in Karakura Town with its litany of defenders at the ready if all they wanted were souls? That couldn't be all that they wanted. What trouble this whole thing was turning out to be, but for a first operation to get their feet wet, Equilibrium couldn't really have asked for anything better to debut off of. Gar's cell phone began to go off as he enjoyed his time taking a side trip through the park on his way back to Mother Base. Finding a good place to take a break and sit down, Gar fished the phone out of his pocket and set his gourd down next to him on the ground. Hello. Hey Gar. What's up? Did you get lost or something? Yoruichi-chan and the Gote 13 reps beat you back here by 2 hours. Hearing Naruto on the phone got Gar to release a sigh. I wasn't aware you had a mission for me that required my urgent attention, Naruto. Gar said in his even-toned manner of speaking, though it was clear he was being snippy in his commentary. Well, I don't. But, yeah, you're right. You're over 2,000 years old, you can take care of yourself. Take your time. If anything comes up, I'll call you if we need you. Feel free. Gar said, looking at the nearby fountain that was spewing out water by the gallons. It didn't seem normal. Fountains weren't supposed to get full, were they? Having lived his entire life and afterlife in a desert where water was scarce if it even existed at all, Gar was unaware of normal fountain protocol. It just seemed off to him. Gaara got up and walked over to the fountain to find it almost full as he had observed from afar. Someone needed to call city maintenance or something. Shut off the water, take some kind of precaution. What a waste otherwise. Didn't people know such a resource was precious? As he neared the fountain, Gaara saw 2 bottle caps floating within, neither sitting at the top of the water or sitting at the bottom. Something he narrowed his eyes at before the entire fountain of water burst up, and tried to ensnare him or whatever it was trying to do. Luckily Gaara was aware enough of something being funny with the situation that he was able to evade the sneak attack. The former Sunagakur shinobi let out a grunt as he quickly made it back to his gourd and placed it on his back, prepared for confronting his attacker. You think you can simply attack me and win just like that? Gaara said out loud for the benefit of whoever was attacking him. I may not be as strong inside of my body as I was when I was alive, but I wouldn't even have to leave my Gigai for this. If he even had to leave his Gigai to fight whomever was facing him, he would have been cautious in doing so. With the Shinigami watching over the activities of Equilibrium for the time being, they wouldn't be able to ignore the absurd amount of Ryatsu that would immediately spring from Gaara's Arrancar form. The cork of his gore popped off, and sand began to billow out in preparation for battle, as he kept his eyes peeled. The water had seemingly taken the form of 2 large bulbous stalk-like globs that seemed alive, wiggling around as if they were about to attack Gaara again. It had to be water, didn't it? Gaara thought to himself with a frown evident on his otherwise non-expressive features. You had better hope I don't find you. Gaara said before the water crashed directly at him, moving swiftly and cutting off any escape for him. After smashing into Gaara, his body turned into grains of sand that fell to the ground, soaked and battered. The actual Gaara was nowhere in sight, but in the air, a large eye scanned the area around the park, looking for the ones controlling the water creature that happened to be storming about on the ground. After getting sight of exactly what it was looking for, the eye dispersed into grains of sand. He seems to have run away, brother. Indeed. Perhaps he is going to inform the Uzumaki person we've been hearing about of our location, but we'll be long gone before then. Let's go, Bon. Right behind you, Ho. As the 2 bounce were about to leave their hiding place, another voice stopped them from doing so. You thought I would run away from you? That's a very big insult to me, just so you know. Gaara descended while standing on a platform of sand with his arms crossed over his chest. The 2 bounce were actually young children. 2 boys wearing dark gray shorts, brown sweatshirts, and hats. One had short hair and a red cap, Ho, and the other had a white skull cap and longer hair, Bon. So, you found us? Bon said, turning around with his twin brother to face Gaara. But what are you going to do now? Gaara didn't even blink as his sand platform drifted to the ground and collapsed, allowing his sand to go back to its normal wispy, easily malleable form, capture you and interrogate you at Mother Base. He informed them, sounding casual over the whole matter. Or you can just tell me what I want to know now, and promise not to attack any more living humans. We see, Ho said, moving to a potentially defensive position as he saw Gaara's sand move around slowly. But you have to understand, with a choice like that, there really isn't much of a choice at all. Bon said, finishing his twin sentence for him. Gaara's sand moved to capture the pair and restrain them to be taken back to base, but as he did so their water doll came to their defense, stopping in front of them and forcing Gaara to avert his sand lest he find his signature shinobi weapon drenched and harder to use. Our doll's Gull and Gunther are connected to us mentally, as am I with my own brother. We're the most powerful team due to the fact that we don't need to speak to communicate. Gaara uncrossed his arms and began using his hands to guide his sand more precisely if this was what he would have to contend with. He hated water users, at least he hated fighting them, mostly because water could affect his control over sand to the best of his ability, and because he lived in a desert where water was scarce in the first place. Using water for ninjutsu always seemed like a waste to him. Apparently, they could control their water like his sand without any hand seals at all. Kami, he hated not living in ninja times again when a person's technique could be broken down by the kind of hand seals they use. But well, much like Naruto, he worked better with a handicap, and this was one hell of a handicap if he had ever faced one. A weaker body, a disadvantage against water, a 2-on-1 fight. Yes, it was quite the disadvantage. Still, he had not gotten a decent battle in his Gigai outside of the spars he had with others like Chad, Tsuki, and Naruto. He was overdue for a fight that would give him some work either way, and this was as good a time as any for one. Well then, since you won't simply surrender to me, Gaara said, not reacting to the threat the two posed him in any way, shall we begin? The answer of both Ho and Bon was to use their dolls that embodied water itself to blast at Gaara, to assume their attack once more. Mother Base. Executive Floor. Uzumaki Naruto's office, / quarters. The front room of Naruto's designated area of the base was set up to look like the office of the Hokage, back when he was a Konoha ninja. Gaara called it a subconscious yearning for something that he was unable to get in his own time. Naruto then proceeded to mention that Gaara's own front room of his office then looked just like his office when he was Kazekage, right down to the walls. He still wondered how Gaara managed that, and Gaara proceeded to shut up for the rest of the furnishing period of the base. No one wanted to go into Hidan's room though, even to just see what it looked like. They were afraid of what they would see, and thought they were better off not knowing. So, Naruto sat at his replica Hokage's desk in the big cushy chair behind it. The only exception was that there was no kanji for fire on the front of the desk. Instead, there was the simple swirl pattern that was his clan's insignia. In front of him and seats facing him were the Gote 13 representatives, Shuhei, Rangiku, and Rukia. In his lap was Yoruichi for some reason, sitting contently. Not that he had a problem with that, but it didn't exactly scream professional or to take them seriously, especially with her smirking at him, daring him to tell her to get off. Damn, that woman was always trying to kill his attempt to look qualified. The shoe wasn't so great. Maybe if he had some Kage robes on that would have helped. The hat definitely would have made an impression for certain. Wow, maybe Gar was right, maybe he was subconsciously yearning for recognition as a Kage. Meh, there'd be time for that later. Not like there was a budget or anything, so, Naruto said to begin speaking at the little meeting. You guys are supposed to be observing the way we operate. What exactly is that going to involve, just so I know? Shuhei slouched comfortably in his chair, finding the environment a very calming place. Well, we're supposed to note as much of your personnel as we can, which we already did after seeing everyone, including the Ryoka from the Serite infiltration. Knew it? Yoruichi said quietly into Naruto's ear, chiming in between the 9th Division Lieutenant's words. Way to try and be all cloak and dagger back at the meeting in the Serite. At least his bluff in front of Yamamoto served the purpose of him not running the risk of figuring out that Naruto would have lied to him about Hidan and Gar's abilities. Whatever the Shinigami here would manage to collect on the pair would only be in their Gigai, if they were smart enough to stay in them. Shush it, Naruto said, slapping her high up on the thigh behind the desk and out of sight. Yoruichi rolled her eyes as Naruto turned his attention back to Shuhei. So yeah, since you've seen everyone that works here, what's next? Rangiku clapped her hands together once in a happy-looking manner. Well, next it's the actual observation part. One of us will observe the administration aspect of your group. Shuhei lifted his hand in acknowledgement of his role. Another will observe the day-to-day operatives that you have, and see how they work. Rukia nodded with a small smile on her face, indicating that it would be her doing that, and the last one of us will be directly observing Karakura Town, and seeing how your presence affects it overall. That one will be done by me. Shuhei fought the urge to palm his face. Rangiku's observation of Karakura Town would be carried out for around 2 hours. The rest of it would be done by way of her shopping and goofing around. He was well aware of how his longtime drinking partner would operate on such a mission. On the other hand, Naruto and Yoruichi weren't aware, and this sounded like a completely plausible plan of action for the 3 Shinigami observers. So we're just to act normally, as if nothing out of the ordinary is going on, right? Shuhei nodded and Yoruichi grinned almost unseen. Well, I think we have that well under control, don't we, Naruto? Yes, Naruto said with a deadpan look on his face as Yoruichi pulled on his whisker-marked cheek. Yoruichi-chan is always messing with me like this. It's totally normal. Rukia's eyebrow raised up at hearing that bit of information, while Yoruichi kept manipulating Naruto's face with her hands. Once she realized that he was not going to try and stop her from doing so, I thought you were the one in charge. I am. So why don't you just tell her to stop or something? Naruto turned his head towards the happily smiling Yoruichi, as if she knew what he was going to say, and seemed okay with his coming answer. I could tell her to stop if it really bothered me, but if it's not important she won't listen to me anyway. How important? People dying important. And you're okay with that? Why wouldn't I be? Naruto asked with a curious expression on his face, one that was shared by Yoruichi as she had his cheek stretched out. She does great work, she listens to me, when I actually order her to do stuff, and most of the things I know about the afterlife I know from her. If it wasn't for her, I wouldn't even know anything about the Serite, and probably would have done something involving hollows or plus souls in general, to get your attention by now, and not in a good way. He could only imagine. He thought the Gato was a separate plane to store things like items or people he wanted to protect, and it just wasn't that simple. If he had taken it upon himself to try and navigate or protect souls the way he found out that Shinigami did, he might have ended up throwing hundreds or maybe thousands of them right into Hueco Mundo. That would have been awkward to explain when the Shinigami eventually confronted him on it. Once again, thank goodness Yoruichi found him that day that hollows attacked Karakura Town by the droves. Or his little series of experiments with the Rinnegan abilities could have taken a sour turn after that encounter. Well, there's nothing wrong with that, Rukia said earnestly, not very surprised since quite a few Gote 13 captains and seated officers had a similar laissez-faire way of handling things amongst their ranks, her squad included. As long as things got done, it didn't matter how they went about doing it. At that moment, Yoruichi's eyes seemed to harden slightly at the feeling of a familiar power in the distance. Naruto, I think Gar is fighting. His energy spiked the way it does whenever he fights in the training room. I just called him, and he said he'd tell me if something was going on. Naruto said, palming his forehead hard. Fine, I guess we'll have to talk to these guys later. Hopefully the mod souls felt the bound that he should be fighting, but either way could you go ahead and call. Before he could finish his statement, a familiar reiatsu that hadn't been felt in quite some time by those that were aware of the source fell over the entire building and stopped Naruto, Yoruichi, and Ruki cold, with the petite Shinigami speaking up first on the subject. Was it just? I think it was. Naruto had a massive grin on his face because an assumption that had been made by the hastily conceived brain trust had actually been correct. Forget calling Chatter Chico, I'd rather. I'll go get him and tell him to leave right now. He's probably eager to jump right back into the mix of things anyway. Yoruichi said, hopping up out of Naruto's lap and walking to the door to go fetch the person she already knew he was alluding to. As the door to the office shut behind her, Naruto looked back at the group of Shinigami in his office with a victorious face as he leaned back in his chair. See? Yoruichi-chan does things for me, and I usually don't even have to say anything to get her to do it. It's like she's in my head sometimes. Gaara vs Hoenban. Another rush of water sent at the stationary Gaara did nothing against the bulky wall of sand Gaara formed between himself and the liquid, and apparently, they couldn't generate enough force with their water to bust through the wall. As the attack subsided, Gaara shifted the wet sand that had been the front of his wall towards the back for his drier sand, and waved his hand in a side-to-side pattern. Successive shots. Sand drizzle. The sand fired off multiple sand projectiles at Hoenban, forcing them to duck behind the trees in the park where they were battling. We can't reach him. Ho said as the sounds of the sand thudding off of the trees echoed out. What do we do now? Ban narrowed his eyes as he tried to peer at Gaara, and had to duck his head back behind the trunk, as a shot of sand stripped the bark off of it. If he is able to handle the amount of water we have now, then we simply have to get more, don't we? Sand burial. The sand that Gaara had used to fire at Hoenban stuck to the trunks of the trees, and allowed Gaara to crush the wood with his sand to get rid of their cover. Hoenban ran away as fast as the two youthful-looking bounds could once they saw the pressure that Gaara's sand could squeeze with. Gaara's sand was in pursuit of them, and would have quickly captured them had the water dolls Gull and Gunther not utterly drenched every grain coming to the defense of their bound masters. An annoyed grunt from Gaara followed as he called his sand back close to himself, and moved to catch the two brothers, something he did in a matter of moments, finding them right back where the battle had more or less begun, at the fountain. And the fact that they had seemed to stop running didn't give him any reason to relax in his mind. The thing about our dolls are, Ho started to say, that they can control any water, any body of water they come into contact with. Ban finished with a smirk. Gaara sent his sand at the unprotected pair, but a rumbling underneath his feet gave way to the ground actually cracking, and water from underground began swiftly and heavily bubbling up over the pavement, flooding the ground. Gaara switched his sand from attacking to taking him off of the ground and into the air to avoid the water that seemed to be trying to grab him. Maybe you're the one that should think about surrendering and leaving. Ban said as he and his brother started amassing more and more water to rise up from the ground to try and reach Gaara out of the air. The water took on a large glob-like form that seemed to be several stories high. The attacking bounce grinned as parts of the creature stretched up towards Gaara to snatch him out of the sky. You think this is all the sand I have under my control? Huh? Ho said, hearing how unconcerned Gaara seemed to be facing down the massive water creature. I said. The hands of Gaara slowly raised into the air as if he were trying to lift something that was unseen and heavy, due to the speed at which he was drawing his arms up. Do you really think that this is all the sand that I have under my control? Both Ho and Ban started looking around as they heard a low rumbling coming from around them. They then caught sight of sand moving around the trees surrounding the cracked pavement and fountain. Waves and waves of sand, and they jumped into the fountain to avoid the rush of the grains. How can you possibly get all of this sand? Ho shouted in alarm. We can control tons of water with Gull and Gunther, but we need an existing source like the water in the pipes leading through this fountain. There's no amount of sand like this anywhere in Karakura town. I can send my sand into the ground and grind up the minerals to make more. As long as I have even a small amount of my sand, I can always make more anywhere I go, as much as I need. Gaara said informatively as his sand began to swirl past the fountain, and bashed into Gull and Gunther, the blunt force of the sand tearing the glob of water into segments. With the immediate threat to himself handled, Gaara turned his sand onto the twins, as it began to engulf the entire fountain in a wide-open trapping bowl, sand-binding prison. The twins were not nearly fleet-footed enough to escape being trapped, but their dolls were not as slow as they were, and sprang to Ho and Ban's defense. Before Gaara's jutsu finished closing, the two dolls blocked the opening with a forceful torrent of whipping water. Long enough for both boys to burst free through said water and avoid capture as they seemed to surf out as far away from the sand trap on the water that comprised their dolls' effective forms. Trying to trap those two without killing them was turning out to be a pain in Gaara's ass. And apparently, they had forgotten that Gaara had explicitly told them that he was going to capture and interrogate them, because upon escaping they looked as if they had survived Gaara's best shot. Putting distance between themselves and Gaara's failed attempt to capture them, Ban smirked at the red-haired Arrancar. Well, that didn't work. Is that the best you've got? No? Gaara said plainly, I just told you that I'm going to take you alive. An opportunity to catch a bound and extract information from you on your activities is something that I cannot pass up, even if it would be exceedingly easier. He was clearly the best equipped to do so out of equilibrium. Naruto and Hidan weren't the capturing type, more used to obliterating their targets. The same went for Ichigo and Chad. Tatsuki would have probably been defeated by the pair by now. Yoruichi didn't fight unless she felt like it, Urahara and his workers didn't fight unless there was something the man himself wanted to observe, and Orihime didn't really choose to fight, period. But Ho and Bon took offense to how calm Gar still was. He seemed to be as cool as a cucumber. Not a single offensive move they had attempted from the outset of the battle managed to take that same monotone expression off of his face. You think you can beat us so easily that capture is an option? Both Bon and Ho said simultaneously as more and more water started to be pulled out of the fountain, to the point where the spigot the water came from shattered completely, and water flew out by the gallon. Gar let out a sigh and prepared to continue fighting until a power he had never felt settled over his senses. It had a familiar signature to it, but it was magnified by thousands of times when compared to what he was used to. Is that? He asked himself before a small smile placed itself on his face. So she was able to fix him after all. You're quite impatient, aren't you, Ishida-san? As if Gar's words summoned him out into the open, Ryu strode out of the tree line from behind Gar, and stood next to him with a confident look on his face. I hope I'm not interrupting your battle with these two. He held out his left arm, letting his Quincy cross dangle from the chain he had around his wrist. Do you mind if I step in and fight instead? It's been quite a while and I want to see if Inoe's work was as good as it felt after she finished healing me. All Gar did was step back out of Ryu's way. If it came down to it and he was rusty, he could always step back in and finish the fight in his place. So long as the objective was achieved, he didn't care. Let Ryu stretch his legs. Well, if it isn't the powerless Quincy, Bon said in amusement of Ryu's presence, and it looks like he's got a little of his bite back. But he's still too weak to be anything more than a liability to the stronger one, brother. Ho said in response, let's defeat him quickly and get back to the troublesome one with the sand. Why do that when we can take them both at once? Good point. The water doll Skull and Gunther rushed at both Ryu and Gar with their monstrous forms fueled by the water that was still draining from the burst fountain. Ryu did not move, he merely formed his blue energy Quincy bow, before it took its more elaborate shape that he had used in the Soul Society. The grin came to his face at the feeling of doing such a thing in battle once again, after not being able to do so for months, and it appeared that he didn't have to start over from scratch, even without the Sandray glove. Taking aim with his bow, Ryu fired only 2 shots, and they weren't directed at Ho or Bon. The shots passed through Gull and Gunther, and hit 2 very small targets within the bodies of water. 2 targets that once hit forced all of the water comprising the 2 dolls to fall uselessly to the ground. Both Ho and Bon's eyes widened in complete shock and horror at what Ryu had done. No. Do you know what you've just done? They both asked as Gar didn't miss his opening and used his sand to capture the now defenseless bound twins. Ryu let his bow vanish, and adjusted his glasses on his face. I watched some of your fight with Gar. When he did damage to your water doll, the water always reformed to a certain smaller spots. At a closer look, once I stepped in myself, I was able to see that the 2 particular spots had a bottle cap at the center each. A small target that many wouldn't notice, but for a Quincy archer, it's all that one of us would need. Man, it felt good to talk down to an opponent he had just pulled a massive advantage over. He didn't think he'd missed it that much. No. The ongoing session of Ryu patting himself on the back for such a commanding victory came to an end when both Ho and Bon began turning to dust, much like Ryo had after Tatsuki had smashed him into pulp with the Rasengan. What's happening? Ryu asked. He hadn't shot Ho or Bon, and Gar was not using his sand to crush them, only to capture them. In a matter of seconds, their best efforts to struggle did nothing as they finished turning to dust. Gar's sand released them to allow their Shen remains to fall onto the ground. I didn't do anything to kill them. Gar walked over to the dust that used to comprise Ho and Bon, and kneeled down to observe it, before looking at where the doll Skull and Gunther fell apart. A frown crossed his face as he stood back up. You didn't, but you destroyed their dolls. The bond between Bound and Doll must be incredibly close for them to die because you destroyed them. It made a semblance of sense though. All of the Bound's combat-oriented abilities lay with their dolls, so destroying them had to do something catastrophic. Still though, this wasn't as much of a victory as Gar had originally hoped for. Thus, he felt he was completely in the right when he formed a large hand made out of sand to slap Ryu and send him sprawling across the ground. Ryu jumped back up, spitting out grains of sand and glaring at Gar. What possible reason would you have had for that? I was trying to capture those 2, not kill them. Gar said with his arms crossed as his sand filtered back into his gourd and his core closed it off. If I had been trying to kill them, my battle style would have been far more offensive. Well, it wasn't as if I tried to kill them either. Ryu defended, temporarily losing his cool at Gar's expense before regaining composure and thinking about the waste that had just occurred. So much could have been gained from catching Ho and Bon, damn it. It was accidental, that much was clear. But now they at least had another way of destroying a bound, by getting rid of their dolls. That was something. Meanwhile, Mother Base. Goodness. Yoruichi said as she lay Arihime's tired, unconscious body down on a bed in one of the rooms set aside for other potential members of Equilibrium in the future. How much power did you use fixing up Ryu? The question of course could not be answered, but that didn't stop Yoruichi from asking. When Yoruichi went to locate Ryu and see if he was in appropriate shape to go and find Gar in case he needed assistance, Arihime was barely able to keep her eyes open, and then proceeded to collapse upon Ryu's leaving of the room. Stubborn girl, she was not going to let her own exhaustion rain down on Ryu's parade of getting his combat capabilities back. Still, there was something to be said about that kind of determination to keep working well past her own limits. When she had tried training Arihime to develop her abilities before the first trip to the Soul Society, she had not expected her to get so good at the healing aspect of her powers. Talk about exceeding expectations, fixing people that were split clean in half, and restoring lost abilities. Doing nothing for hours, but sitting and healing Ryu. After identifying the damaged parts of his energy circulation, Arihime had more than earned her rest, and would be given it for as long as she needed it. Yoruichi left the room, stopping at the door before shaking her head at Arihime with a fond smile on her face. It's scary. You don't even know how powerful you really are, Arihime, she said before flipping off the light and shutting the door. With Hidan. Sick of sitting around and waiting for something to happen, especially since whenever anything did indeed go down, Hidan was too far away to get personally involved. The silver-haired Arrancar in disguise decided to take an active approach and hit the streets looking for anything he could find. He wasn't expecting any bound to actively seek him out, because in his mind such a thing would be tantamount to suicide for the fools, but just any kind of information that was off-kilter that he could dredge up would have been wonderful. Thus, for the entire day he had been traipsing around Karakura town, sticking to the back alleys and trying to get whatever useful information he could about any strange or unnatural things going on, maybe an urban legend or two. Even if there was no inkling of something to lead him to the bounce, there was always a chance that it would lead to something else worthwhile to take up for work later. A lanky-looking guy with slick-back silver hair and wearing black clothes that would have looked right in place at a metal concert that came strolling up to the street toughs requesting/demanding information on random subjects didn't get said street toughs to take kindly to such a happening. And this was the part that Hidan thoroughly relished, because it was downright enjoyable for him to walk around all day doing nothing but getting into random street fights with regular humans, especially when one of them would do something like pull a knife on him. Once they stabbed him, the looks on their faces were priceless right before he would proceed to break their jaws among other body parts. He might have killed a few of them in hindsight, but they should have just told him what he wanted to know. And it wasn't like he'd get in trouble, right? Uzumaki couldn't hold it against him for defending himself. Defending himself, and they were lowlifes regardless. But he managed to beat some interesting rumors out of a few guys that remained conscious after his complete and total gangland thrashings. He was given the location of a few creepy places in town that bore no suspicious fruit, but there was one that was currently looking to be gearing up as a home run. He managed to stomp the piss out of one person that told him the location of the richest person in Karakura town. At first, Hidan didn't want to hear any of that crap, because he already knew the richest man in Karakura town, and where he lived. But when it wasn't revealed to be the industrial district, he then realized that Uzumaki hadn't bought anything or done anything public that someone would have been able to track, other than buying the large, but abandoned office facility that was their base. So, the information led him to a location where there was apparently someone incredibly rich that had never been seen to rob or steal from for any of the thugs he had been talking to. A gated-off beautiful piece of large forested property. With this place being found, Hidan planned to investigate it much like any other place. He figured there might be a bound or something, willing to put his very rusty ninja skills to the test, since unlike the other places this mansion was inhabited by someone. Hidan jumped right over the gate, and cracked his neck upon landing. When was the last fucking time I had to sneak into anywhere? Hidan thought to himself as he skulked through the trees in the dead of night. Man, I don't think I even did any shit like this back when I was actually a ninja. His trip into the potentially hostile territory was cut short when he felt a sword drive through his body from behind. Hidan's gaze turned down to see the length of a katana sticking out of his chest. I wonder how this got here, he said calmly, touching the tip of the blade that was coated in his own blood, before craning his neck behind him to see nothing there. I always did suck at sensing an enemy's presence, but this is ridiculous. With the sword still buried through his chest, Hidan pulled out a sealing scroll, and scraped some of the blood from his stab wound across it, to unseal what used to be his old triple-bladed scythe in life. Only now had the blades on it replaced, and it was no longer attached to his body by the cable that it used to have at the end of it. Hidan spun the scythe in his hand before making a move to turn and swing at whoever had stabbed him from behind. However, with a wet squelch noise, the sword was pulled out, and Hidan's attack missed. Ignoring the bleeding hole in his chest, Hidan's eyes scanned about for any sign of his attacker, but slashes started appearing all over his body. Each and every strike elicited a grunt from Hidan, but a grin started slowly creeping upon his features as blood began to pour from him. You obviously have no idea who you're dealing with, if you think I'm that easy to kill. He lashed out in a seemingly random direction only for a clang to sound out, as his enemy came into sight and blocked with his sword. I didn't even get to pray before a little battle. That really pisses me off. A follow-up swing from Hidan missed as his opponent used flash steps to evade the attack. The attacker was a dark-haired Shinigami wearing a sleeveless uniform that seemed further modified from what Hidan had been conditioned to expect. A Shinigami, Hidan said, expressing interest in the fight. I haven't tangled with one of them for real before. A shame I made a promise to stay in my Gigai, or we could have some serious fun with this battle. The Shinigami in combat with Hidan held his sword up, prepared for Hidan to attack him. So your group discovered this place. I don't know how you did, but you're going to die here. A series of barking laughs ripped from Hidan's throat at the man's declaration. Well, the thing is, when you stay out of sight, you'd better make sure there's nothing extraordinary about you, like the extraordinary amounts of cash you have to be keeping to afford a place like this. I mean, Uzumaki is rich, but you'd never know it because he doesn't waste money on mansions. And you think you can kill me? Go ahead and try. With that, Hidan rushed forward at the Shinigami, wildly swinging his scythe without any kind of rhyme or reason. To the credit of the enemy, he stayed queued up with Hidan all the way, trading strikes with their respective weapons and ignoring Hidan's raving grunts and unnerving shrieks as the melee continued. The two clashed weapons and pushed off, giving some distance once again as the Shinigami addressed Hidan. Where are your partners? Elsewhere on the grounds. Wouldn't you love to know? Hidan taunted before attacking again, dragging the blades of the scythe through the ground before trying an upward swipe that the Shinigami had to lean back out of the way to dodge. He returned fire by delivering a kick to Hidan's exposed side, but Hidan lowered his arm, blocking with his forearm and elbow, a Shinigami being a bitch to the bounce. I'm sure there's something funny about that somewhere. Don't speak about concerns you know nothing about. The outburst quickly settled back down to a seething loathing of the silver-haired berserker as he scrutinized Hidan's bloody appearance. You remind me of that person. And you remind me of something. Hidan retorted lamely. What's your name, bound bitch? Ichinismaki. He didn't feel anything other than an intense dislike for a bloodthirsty butcher like Hidan, but it didn't matter at that time. He wasn't the actual person that he wished he could defeat and destroy. Hidan was just cut from a similar mold. You're a very durable foe, but you're not very polished with your blade work. Blah, 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 let's just fight already. Hidan shouted again as he rushed at Maki. Instead of preparing for another exchange of sword strikes, Maki held out his sword and spoke again. Shine brightly, rainbow mist. The vision of Hidan was immediately assaulted with a rush of bright light that blinded him immensely. Lashing out with a swing of his scythe was not the advised course of action, because after he did so he found his arm cut off at the elbow. Blood squirted from Hidan's stump of an arm as he growled and cursed in pain. You son of a bitch. As his vision returned, he was unable to even see Maki any longer, something that set him off even more. God damn it. You're dead, do you hear me? No. You're dead. There's no more reason to fight you. With a wound like that you'll bleed out in a matter of moments, and that will be that. You should never have come here. After speaking his piece, Maki's presence disappeared from Hidan's limited senses again. Hidan grit his teeth angrily and picked his severed arm up off of the ground. Did he really think that he would just bleed out and die that easily? What kind of bullshit was that? It was insulting, and it was an insult that Hidan was not going to take lying down. Plucking the severed arm still gripping the scythe off of the scythe, so that he could carry it in his hand, that was still intact, Hidan spared one more look around the forest, before heading back to the gate the way he had come in. I'll be back, bound bitch. And I'll guarantee you that by the end of all of this, I'll be eating my cereal out of the back of your skull. And I hope you heard that. He'd be definitely petitioning Uzumaki to leave his Gigai the next time. His Gigai was too spongy, fragile, and susceptible to fight-ending damage, even if he couldn't die, and Kakuzu wasn't around to stitch him back together if he lost a limb. If he could come at that weak bastard as an iron car, the fight wouldn't last 5 minutes though, and he knew it. Out mansion. Common room. TCH. Kane said as he felt Maki's presence re-entering the mansion again. Send the loyal guard dog out to patrol the premises. Korea. He uttered as he pulled his fedora down to shade his eyes. Korea didn't respond to Kane's crack at Maki as there was no reason to do so. It was the way Kane was these days, a mouthy and brash man that was strong enough to deal with the consequences for his attitude, consequences that he hadn't had to face for over a century. On the other hand, there were others in the room aside from Korea and Kane. A professional-looking man with combed black hair, large glasses, a white button-up shirt with a red tie, and black slacks, sat in a wooden chair on a far wall at a desk. A young-looking man wearing white shorts with black trim, and a sleeveless white shirt with a high collar and black trim, with light orange short hair that had one spiky bang hanging over his right eye, leaned against the wall by the door. An old man with gray hair wearing a black suit and a purple ascot around his neck, sat in a cushy armchair. A large, muscular man with short red hair, a beard, and an orange mohawk sat in a couch wearing a gray tank top and black pants with large headphones around his neck. On the arm of the same couch there was a woman with long dark green hair wearing a purple Chinese-style kipao and beige pants. Out of the lot of them, only the man leaning against the wall by the door and the woman sitting on the arm of the couch spared a glance to glare momentarily at Kane. He was such a pain to have around, and no one could check that attitude of his because of how powerful he was. I really wish sometimes you'd know when no one wants to hear your shit, Kane. The green-haired woman said, getting a smirk out of Kane that got a scoff out of her. Oh, come on Yoshi. Kane started up once again, just because of Mabashi's throat right now. He gestured over to the young-looking man leaning against the wall. That doesn't mean that I'm the next best thing to pick a fight with. The muscular man in the couch kept Yoshi from trying to stand up and go into further detail on the matter before addressing Kane. You should know by now not to intentionally try to come to blows with your bound brethren. Both of you, he said, making sure Yoshi got the picture as well before she ripped her arm out of his grasp. Kane was able to feign an apologetic look at the man. Sorry Master Koga, I'm just a little stir-crazy being cooped up in this mansion so much. I mean, we can't all just run off as we please the way Ishino does. The twins are dead. The young man against the wall, Mabashi said before flipping his bang back, uselessly because it merely descended back over his eye. Stupid brats should have done more legwork before picking a fight with the first straggler they came across. Yoshi turned towards Mabashi and spoke up, and you think you can do better than them? You'll probably drop dead the second you fight a single Shinigami. Oh, shut up you old hag. Mabashi responded in order to get under Yoshi's skin. What would you know about anything to do with fighting? You might as well be like Yugaki for as much as you suck with your powers, he said, gesturing his head towards the bespectacled man sitting at the desk. Taking offense to being slighted at her abilities. This time Koga didn't even try to stop Yoshi as she jumped up looking ready to fight. I'll cut you down in a heartbeat, and show you just why you're the weakest link in the room you piece of. I'm tired of hearing you bicker. The old man in the armchair said cantankerously. Are we here for a reason or is it just to listen to these idiots all take jabs at each other? He asked Korea. There was no sign of Korea having taken any offense to his subordinates and their actions. I wish you were all more patient like Koga, he said with a chuckle, but we've finally identified our Quincy. Now all we need to do is merely take him for ourselves. His powers have conveniently been restored for our benefit. And this is where you will all come in, even Yoshino. The man with glasses, Yugaki, spun around in his chair at his desk to face all of the other bounds. We can't waste any time with this next move. They know where we are now, and we know that they're willing to react to us. So, we just have to create a scenario that they all have to adjust accordingly to. Finally, Kane exclaimed in a boisterous manner before more and more lunacy seemed to seep into his voice. I'm gonna track Uzumaki down, and I'm gonna tear him apart. Make a fool out of me and Wayne will he? Kane. Koga exclaimed with an authoritative voice. Control. I didn't teach you to be impulsive and fly off the handle, now settle down. Hearing Koga's order, Kane shifted a glare to him that didn't even last for a second before he lowered his head. Sorry Master Koga. It's just that you know already what I'm willing to do to that bastard. His fist shook at his side, merely thinking of his stupid grinning face with those absurd facial markings. I'll carve some scars into those stupid marks of his with my bare hands. With an air of normality settling over the room, Korea nodded his gratitude to Koga. Thank you Gu, he said, using the man's given name in a show of familiarity. As I was saying, you will each have your parts to play to isolate our Quincy friend, and further our plans. Each of you should be prepared for battle, even you Satori, he said to the old man who merely grunted in response. This is all I wish to say. With that, Mabashi walked towards the door and opened it to leave, the other bounds slowly filtering their way out of the room as well, even Satori at a reserved pace, leaving Korea and Yugaki alone in the room. How are you going to utilize the special ability of our most unique bound tomorrow? Yugaki asked Korea curiously. You're not really willing to let her fight and possibly wind up lost, are you? Korea shook his head and walked over to the man, setting a hand on his shoulder. Our dear Yoshino, she'll do exactly what I need her to do in one way or the other tomorrow, even if she does end up fighting. Best case scenario, we take down 2 birds with 1 stone. Either way her use will come to fruition. There's nothing to worry about. Yugaki smirked as he turned back around in his chair back towards the desk. Oh, I was never concerned. I was just ensuring that our fearless leader had his priorities straightened out for tomorrow, if everyone is to engage in battle. How charming of you, Korea said with a slight laugh as he left the room himself. Like I said, there's nothing to worry about. We are far too close now to fail so easily, and there were only so many ways the enemy can react to our presence. They can't see everything and in the end, they still know nothing. Jacks of all trades. What do you mean covered jobs? Ichigo asked irritably as he, Chad, Uryu, Orihime, and Tatsuki sat in the dining area, while Naruto and Yoruichi stood to speak to them. Naruto rolled his eyes and decided to explain. Do you think that all we're going to be doing is looking for hollows and supernatural stuff? No. There's no real-world income for that, and I'm not paying you straight out of my own pocket, with my own hard-earned book sales, and personal merc work forever without getting some kind of return. At some point once we finish working out how we're going to handle all of this, you're going to be doing odd jobs and mercenary work. Chad didn't know exactly what mercenary work entailed. This he felt the need to ask, like what exactly? Lifting her hand to begin counting things off on her fingers, Yoruichi proceeded to state what could be considered possible jobs. Let's see, distance transportation of sundry goods and items, bounty hunting, bodyguards. Black Ops military crap for both potentially the Serite and the living world's governments, physical manual labor, stand-in work for certain groups that need a substitute of some sort, all kinds of things really. We could wind up doing next to anything. I'm not killing anyone for money. Chad said resolutely with absolutely no room for argument. No one else said so, but everybody felt pretty much the exact same. They weren't going to just go and end someone's life for no reason other than being paid to do so. Naruto and Yoruichi looked at each other before turning back to Chad, with Yoruichi again addressing him. We weren't going to make any of you kill anyone. As a matter of fact, we'll be screening requests, and we won't accept any that we don't want to take. And depending on your skill set, certain jobs will be recommended for you. Then there's the fact that you can get your own jobs if you really wanted to. Besides, if an assassination that they felt like accepting really came up, that was what Hidan was for. Orihime raised her hand as if they were in school, and Yoruichi pointed at her. Yes, Orihime. Orihime let her hand fall before asking her question. So we can be astronauts? Tatsuki, without missing a beat, palmed her forehead hard at her best friend's query, while the other boys looked at her as if she were insane. They should have been used to it by then, in all honesty. In return, Yoruichi gave her a dry look while Naruto had one of complete amusement on his face, watching Yoruichi try to make a case. Well, in theory, I guess you could be an astronaut for one of your possible jobs. That's right, Orihime-chan, reach for the stars. Ignoring her sensei Naruto's outburst of encouragement as Orihime's eyes seemed to shine over with the possible career opportunities running through her head, Tatsuki decided to be the more proactive of the youngsters in the room. So, if I became a professional fighter or something along those lines. Now that's a great side job. Yoruichi explained with a smile, seeing that someone was getting the point, and with a job like that we would be your managers, and you would give us 25% of what you made. 25%. Tatsuki bristled at hearing how much of her future potential fight purses she would have to part with if she were to take such a career path. What the hell kind of managers would you be? The managers that trained you, provided you with a facility, gave you sparring partners, transportation of any kind, a free place to stay if any of you wanted to live here. Naruto said, listing reasons with a completely straight face. Managers like that. Point taken. Tatsuki's face fell, and her fire to dispute such a loss of money faded out. Okay, well, when you put it that way, never mind, she said sheepishly. Ryu was the next to ask a question. What about if we want to go to college? Ichigo stuck his tongue out at the thought. He wasn't particularly the type to want to shoot for more education, even though his grades were pretty good. Go to college if you want to, Naruto said, picking his ear absently. We're still going to bug you with work. A chuckle came from Yoruichi as she crossed her arms over her chest. Definitely, because we're probably going to be the ones putting you through college anyway. That sounded good enough to Ryu. He'd probably get bored in college if he didn't get to do some ridiculous, crazy supernatural job or mission, now that he had been doing so for as long as he had been. Still, he had one more concern. Do we get health insurance or dental? He asked, adjusting his glasses on his face, as if he had asked an important, make-or-break question. Everyone in the room, Orihime included, just gave him a deadpan stare that eventually made Ryu feel self-conscious about asking in the first place. As time dragged on, Naruto eventually came up with an appropriate sarcastic response to such a question. Yes, you get health insurance and dental for working here. Our health plan goes by the name of Shun Shun Rika, and our physician of choice is Inoue Orihime-chan, he said, pointing to the resident healer, trying to be as smartest and everything. Yoshida, way to ruin the assembly. Ichigo followed up grumpily, putting the storm cloud over Ryu's head further. Thanks for listening. I do hope you enjoyed. If you want a next part of this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification. And also check out the other videos that I have created, and enjoy. See you in the next video. Peace.